16. The Muqaddimah Chapter 6 Part 3. 16. The Science of Sufism 454. This science belongs to the sciences of the religious law that originated in Islam. Sufism is based on the assumption that the method of those people, who later on came to be called Sufis, had always been considered by the important early Muslims, the men around Muhammad and the men of the second generation, as well as those who came after them, as the path of truth and right guidance. The Sufi approach is based upon constant application to divine worship, complete devotion to God, aversion to the false splendor of the world, abstinence from the pleasure, property, and position to which the great mass aspires, and retirement from the world into solitude for divine worship. These things were general among the men around Muhammad and the early Muslims. Then, worldly aspirations increased in the 2nd, 8th century and after. People now inclined toward worldly affairs. At that time, the special name of Sufis, Sufiyya and Mutasawwifa, was given to those who aspired to divine worship. Al-Kashiri says, no etymology or analogy can be found for this term in the Arabic language. It is obvious that it is a nickname. Theories deriving the word from asafa, purity, sincerity, or from as-safa, bench, or from as-saf, row, 455 are improbable from the point of view of linguistic analogy. Al-Kashiri continued, the same applies to the derivation from as-saf, wool. Because the Sufis were not the only ones who wore wool. 456. I say, the most obvious etymology, if one uses one, is that which connects the word with as-saf, because Sufis as a rule were characterized by the fact that they wore woolen garments. They were opposed to people wearing gorgeous garments, and, therefore, chose to wear wool. The Sufis came to represent asceticism, retirement from the world, and devotion to divine worship. Then, they developed a particular kind of perception which comes about through ecstatic experience. 457. This comes about as follows. Man, as man, is distinguished from all the other animals by his ability to perceive. His perception is of two kinds. He can perceive sciences and matters of knowledge, and these may be certain, hypothetical, doubtful, or imaginary. Also, he can perceive states persisting in himself, such as joy and grief, anxiety and relaxation, satisfaction, anger, patience, gratefulness, and similar things. The reasoning part 458 active in the body originates from perceptions, volitions, and states. It is through them that man is distinguished from the other animals, as we have stated. 459. They originate from each other. Thus, knowledge originates from evidence, grief and joy from the perception of what is painful or pleasurable, energy from rest, and inertia from being tired. In the same way, the exertion and worship of the Sufi novice must lead to a state that is the result of his exertion. That state may be a kind of divine worship. Then, it will be firmly rooted in the Sufi novice and become a station for him. Or, it may not be divine worship, but merely an attribute affecting the soul, such as joy or gladness, 460 energy or inertia, or something else. The stations form an ascending order. The Sufi novice continues to progress from station to station, until he reaches the recognition of the oneness of God, Tawhid, and the gnosis, Ma'rifah, which is the desired goal of happiness. Muhammad says, whoever dies confessing that there is no God but God, enters paradise. 461. Thus, the novice must progress by such stages. The basis of all of them is obedience and sincerity. Faith precedes and accompanies all of them. Their result and fruit are states and attributes. They lead to others, and again others, up to the station of the recognition of the oneness of God and of gnosis, If the result 462 shows some shortcoming or defect, one can be sure that it comes from some shortcoming that existed in the previous stage. The same applies to the ideas of the soul and the inspirations of the heart. The novice, therefore, must scrutinize, muasaba, himself in all his actions and study their concealed import, because the results, of necessity, originate from actions, and shortcomings in the results, thus, originate from defects in the actions. The Sufi novice finds out about that through his mystical experience 463 and he scrutinizes himself as to its reasons. Very few people share the self-scrutiny of the Sufis, for negligence in this respect is almost universal. Pious people who do not get that far perform, at best, acts of obedience 464 freed from the juridical study of how to be satisfactory 465 and conforming, in the execution of the acts of divine worship. The Sufis, however, investigate the results of acts of obedience, with the help of mystical and ecstatic experience, in order to learn whether they are free from deficiency or not. Thus, it is evident that the Sufi's path in its entirety depends upon self-scrutiny with regard to what they do or do not do, and upon discussion of the various kinds of mystical and ecstatic experience that result from their exertions. This, then, crystallizes for the Sufi novice in a station. From that station, he can progress to another, higher one. Furthermore, the Sufis have their peculiar form of behavior and a peculiar linguistic terminology which they use in instruction 466. Linguistic data apply only to commonly accepted ideas. When there occur ideas not commonly accepted, technical terms facilitating the understanding of those ideas are coined to express them. Thus, the Sufis had their special discipline, which is not discussed by other representatives of the religious law. As a consequence, the science of the religious law came to consist of two kinds. One is the special field of jurists and muftis. It is concerned with the general laws governing the acts of divine worship, customary actions, and mutual dealings. The other is the special field of the people, Sufis. It is concerned with pious exertion, self-scrutiny with regard to it, discussion of the different kinds of mystical and ecstatic experience occurring in the course of self-scrutiny, the mode of ascent from one mystical experience to another, and the interpretation of the technical terminology of mysticism in use among them. When the sciences were written down systematically and when the jurists wrote works on jurisprudence and the principles of jurisprudence, on speculative theology, Qur'an interpretation, and other subjects, the Sufis, too, wrote on their subject. Some Sufis wrote on the laws governing asceticism and self-scrutiny, how to act and not act in imitation of model saints. That was done by Al-Mu'asabi, in his Kitab al-Riyaya. 467 other Sufi authors wrote on the behavior of Sufis, and their different kinds of mystical and ecstatic experience in the states. Al-Kashiri in his Kitab al-Risalah, and As-Suhrawardi 468 in the Kitab Awarif al-Ma'arif, as well as others, did this. Al-Ghazali combined the two matters in the Kitab al-Ihya. In it, he dealt systematically with the laws governing asceticism and the imitation of models. Then, he explained the behavior and customs of the people, Sufis, and commented on their technical vocabulary. Thus, the science of Sufism became a systematically treated discipline in Islam. Before that, mysticism had merely consisted of divine worship, and its laws had existed in the breasts of men. The same had been the case with all other disciplines, such as Qur'an interpretation, the science of tradition, jurisprudence, the principles of jurisprudence, and other disciplines. They were only later on treated systematically. Mystical 469 Exertion, Retirement, 470 and Decor Exercises 471 are as a rule followed by the removal of the veil, kashf, of sensual perception. The Sufi beholds divine worlds which a person subject to the senses cannot perceive at all. The spirit belongs to those worlds. The reason for the removal of the veil is the following. When the spirit turns from external sense perception to inner perception, the senses weaken, and the spirit grows strong. It gains predominance and a new growth. The decor exercise helps to bring that about. It is like food to make the spirit grow. The spirit continues to grow and to increase. It had been knowledge. Now, it becomes vision. The veil of sensual perception is removed, and the soul realizes its essential existence. This is identical with perception. The spirit now is ready for the holy gifts, for the sciences of the divine presence, and for the outpourings of the deity. Its essence realizes its own true character and draws close to the highest sphere, the sphere of the angels. The removal of the veil often happens to people who exert themselves in mystical exercise. They perceive the realities of existence as no one else does. They also perceive many future happenings in advance. With the help of their minds and psychic powers, they are active among the lower existentia, which thus become obedient to their will. The great Sufis do not think much of the removal of the veil and of activity among the low existentia. They give no information about the reality of anything they have not been ordered to discuss. They consider it a tribulation when things of that sort happen to them, and try to escape them whenever they afflict them. 472. The men around Muhammad practiced that kind of mystical exertion. They had a very abundant share in the acts of divine grace, but they did not bother with them. The description of the virtues of Abu Bakr, Umar, 473 and Ali contain much information to this effect. They were followed in this respect by the Sufis who are mentioned in the Risalah of Al-Kashiri, 474, and their later successors. Recent mystics, then, have turned their attention to the removal of the veil and the discussion of perceptions beyond sensual perception. Their ways of mystical exercise in this respect differ. They have taught different methods of mortifying the powers of sensual perception and nourishing the reasoning spirit with decor exercises, so that the soul might fully grow and attain its own essential perception. When this happens, they believe that the whole of existence is encompassed by the perceptions of the soul, that the essences of existence are revealed to them, and that they perceive the reality of all the essences from the divine throne to light reign. 475. This was said by Al-Ghazali in the Kitab al-Ihya, after he had mentioned the forms of mystical exercise. The 476 Sufis do not consider removal of the veil sound, unless it originates in straightforwardness. 477 People who do not eat and who retire from the world, such as sorcerers, Christians, and other ascetics, may obtain removal of the veil without the existence of straightforwardness. However, we mean only that removal of the veil which originates in straightforwardness. It may be compared with the reflections of a mirror. If it is convex or concave, the object reflected by it appears in a distorted form different from the actual form of the object, but if the mirror is flat, the object appears in its correct form. As far as the states impressed upon the soul are concerned, straightforwardness means to the soul what flatness means in a mirror. The recent Sufis, who have occupied themselves with this kind of removal of the veil, talk about the real character of the higher and lower existentia and about the real character of the divine kingdom, the spirit, the divine throne, the divine seat, and similar things. Those who did not share their approach were not able to understand their mystical and ecstatic experiences in this respect. The Muftis partly disapprove of these Sufis and partly accept them. Arguments and proofs are of no use in deciding whether the Sufi approach should be rejected or accepted, since it belongs to intuitive 478 experience. Some 479 details in explanation. Hadith scholars and jurists who discuss the articles of faith often mention that God is separate from his creatures. The speculative theologians say that he is neither separate nor connected. The philosophers say that he is neither in the world nor outside it. The recent Sufis say that he is one with the creatures, in the sense that he is incarnate in them, or in the sense that he is identical with them and there exists nothing but himself either, in the whole or in any part of it. Let us explain in detail these dogmatic opinions and the real meaning of each of them, so that their significance will be clarified. We say, separateness has two meanings. It may mean separateness in space and direction. 479 are the opposite, then, would be connectedness. In this sense, the statement of separation, 480 implies that God is in some place, either directly, which would be direct anthropomorphism, tashsim, or indirectly, which would be indirect anthropomorphism, tashbih. 481 in the way in which one speaks about God's having direction. It has been reported that an early Muslim scholar similarly professed the separateness of God, but a different interpretation is possible. The speculative theologians, therefore, did not acknowledge this kind of separateness. They said, it cannot be said that the Creator is separate from his creatures, and it cannot be said that he is connected with them, because such a statement can be made only about things in space. The statement that a particular thing 482 can be described as devoid of one concept and at the same time of the opposite of that concept depends upon whether the description is sound in the first place, or not. If it is impossible, the statement is not correct. It is, in fact, permissible to describe a certain thing as devoid of one concept and at the same time of the opposite of that concept. Thus, a solid substance may be described as not wise and not ignorant, not powerful and not weak, not causing harm, and not being harmed. 483 Now, the correctness of describing God as separate in the way mentioned is predicated upon the possibility of ascribing direction to him in the proper meaning of the word, but this cannot be done with the Creator, who is free from such a description. This was mentioned by Ibn at-Tirmidhi 484 in his commentary on the Luma of the Imam al-Haramayn. He said, the Creator can neither be said to be separate from the world, nor to be connected with it. He is not in it and not outside it. That is what is meant by the philosophers when they say that he is neither in the world nor outside it. They base themselves on the assumption that there exist substances, atoms, that exist not in space. The speculative theologians did not acknowledge their existence, because they would have to be considered equal to the Creator in the most specific qualities. That is fully dealt with in the science of speculative theology. The other meaning of separateness is being distinct and different. The Creator is called separate from his creatures in his essence, identity, existence, and attributes. The opposite is being one, mingled, and merged, with something else. God's separateness in this sense is assumed in the dogmas of all Orthodox people, such as the great mass of early Muslims, the religious scholars, the speculative theologians, and the ancient Sufis, such as the men mentioned in Al-Kashiri's Risala, and those who follow them. A number of recent Sufis who consider intuitive 485 perceptions to be scientific and logical, hold the opinion that the Creator is one with his creatures in his identity, his existence, and his attributes. They often assume that this was the opinion of the philosophers before Aristotle, such as Plato and Socrates. That is what the speculative theologians mean when they speak about the oneness of God with his creatures, in theology and try to refute it. They do not 486 mean that there could be a question of two essences, one of which must be negated or comprised, in the other, as a part, in the whole. That would be clear distinctness, and they do not maintain that to be the case. The oneness, assumed by the Sufis, is identical with the incarnation the Christians claim for the Messiah. It is even stranger, in that it is the incarnation of something primeval in something created and the oneness of the former with the latter. The oneness assumed by the Sufis is also identical with the stated opinion of the Imamiyya Shia concerning their Imams 487 in their discussion. The Shia 488 consider two ways in which the oneness of the deity with the Imams is achieved. 1. The essence of the primeval deity is hidden in all created things, both sensibilia and intelligibilia, and is one with them in both kinds of perception. All of them are manifestations of it, and it has control over them, that is, it controls their existence in the sense that, without it, they would not exist. Such is the opinion of the people who believe in incarnation. 2. There is the approach of those who believe in absolute oneness. It seems as if in the exposition of the people who believe in incarnation, they have sensed the existence of a differentness contradicting the concept of oneness. Therefore, they disavowed the existence of differentness between the primeval deity and the creatures in essence, existence, and attributes. In order to explain the differentness of the manifestations perceived by the senses and the intellect, they used the specious argument that those things were human perceptions that are imaginary. By imaginary, they do not mean imaginary as part of the sequence, known, hypothetical, doubtful, but they mean that all those things do not exist in reality and exist only in human perception. Only the primeval deity has real existence, and nothing else, either outwardly or inwardly. Later on, we shall, as far as possible, 489 establish this. In order to understand this intellectually, it is useless to rely upon speculation and argumentation, as is done in connection with human perceptions. This sort of insight corresponds to angelic perceptions and is transferred from them to human beings. Prophets have it through natural disposition. After them, saints have it through divine guidance. But one errs if one wants to obtain it by scientific methods. Authors have occasionally tried to explain the Sufi opinions concerning the revelation, kashf, of existence and the order of the realities of existence according to the approach of the people who have the theory of manifestations, mazai. 490 as compared to people who cultivate speculation. Technical terminology, and the sciences, it must be said that they have always added obscurity to obscurity. An example is Al-Faqih, 491. The commentator on Ibn al-Farid's poem 492, he wrote a preface at the beginning of his commentary. In connection with the origin of the world of existence from the Maker and its order, he mentions that all existence comes forth from the attribute of uniqueness, Waradia, which is the manifestation of unity, Aradia. 493. Both of them together issue from the noble essence that is identical with oneness and nothing else. This process is called revelation, tajalli. The first degree of revelation, tajalli, in Sufi opinion, is the revelation, as such 494 of the essence. This implies perfection, because it emanates creation and appearance, according to God's statement in the prophetic tradition transmitted by the Sufis, I was a concealed treasure. I wanted to be known. Therefore, I created the creatures, so that they might know me. 495. This is perfection in creation descending to the level of existence and particularizatio of the realities. It is, in Sufi opinion, the world of ideas, the Ubilis, Amdaya, presence, 496 and Muhammadan reality. It contains the realities of the attributes, the writing tablet and the pen, the realities of all the prophets and messengers, and the whole of the people of the Muhammadan nation. All this is the particularizatio of the Muhammadan reality. From these realities, other realities issue in the atomic, Habayya, presence, 497, which is the level of the ideas, Mithal. From there, then, issue in succession the divine throne, the divine seat, the spheres, the world of the elements, and the world of composition. All this is, originally, in the world of mending, Ratku, but when these things manifest themselves, they are in the world of rending, Fatku. End of the quotation. This school is called that of the people of revelation, manifestations, and presences. It is a theory that people cultivating logical speculation cannot properly grasp, because it is obscure and cryptic. There also is a great gap between the theories of people who have vision and intuitive experience and those of people who cultivate logical reasoning. 498. Sufi systems, like the one mentioned, are often disapproved of on the strength of the plain wording of the religious law. For no indication of them can be found in it anywhere. Other Sufis turn to affirming absolute oneness. This is a theory, even stranger than the first one to understand in its implications and details. They believe the components of everything in existence to possess powers that bring the realities, forms, and matters of the existing things into being. The elements come into being through the powers that are in them. The same is the case with matter, which has in itself a power that has brought about its existence. Composite things contain such powers implicit in the power that brought about their composition. For instance, the mineral power contains the powers of the elements of matter and, in addition, the mineral power. The animal power contains the mineral power and, in addition, its own power. The same is the case with the human power as compared to animal power. The firmament contains the human power and something in addition. The same applies to the spiritual essences. Now, the power combining everything without any particularizatio is the divine power. It is the power distributed over all existing things, whether they are universals or particulars, combining and comprising them in every aspect, with regard to appearance and hiddenness and with regard to form and matter. everything is one. Oneness is identical with the divine essence. In reality, the divine essence is one and simple. The thing that divides it is the way we look at it. For instance, as to the relationship of humanity to animality, it is clear that the former is included under the latter and comes into being when it comes into being. At times, the Sufis represent the relationship as that of genus to species, which exists in every existing thing, as we have mentioned 499, or they represent it as that of the universal to the particular, according to the theory of ideas, mythal. At any rate, they always try to get away from any thought of composition or manifoldness. They think that manifoldness is brought about by fancy and imagination. It appears from the discussion of Ibn Haqqu, 500, who explains this Sufi theory, that what the Sufis say about oneness is actually similar to what the philosophers say about colors, namely, that their existence is predicated upon light. When there is no light, no colors whatever exist. Thus, the Sufis think that all existing sensibilia are predicated upon the existence of some faculty of sensual perception 501 and, in fact, that all existing intelligibilia and objects of imagination are predicated upon the existence of some faculty of intellectual perception. Thus, every particular in existence is predicated upon the existence of 502, the human faculty that perceives it. If we assumed that no human being with perception exists, there would be no particularizatio in existence. Existence would be simple and one. Thus, heat and cold, solidity and softness, and, indeed, earth, water, fire, heaven, and the stars, exist only because the senses perceiving them exist, because particularizatio that does not exist in existence is made possible for the person who perceives. It exists only in perception. If there were no perceptions to create distinctions, there would be no particularizatio, but just one single perception, namely, the I and nothing else. They consider this comparable to the condition of a sleeper. When he sleeps and has no external sense perception, he loses in that condition all perception of sensibilia, with the exception of the things that the imagination particularizes for him. They continued by saying that a person who is awake likewise experiences particularized perceptions only through the type of human perception that exists in him. If he had not that something in him that perceives, there would be no particularizatio. This is what the Sufis mean when they say imaginary. They do not mean imaginary as a part in the sequence of human perceptions. 503. This is a short exposition of Sufi opinion, as gathered from the discussion of Ibn Haqqu. It is most erroneous. We know for certain that a country which we have quitted on our travels or to which we are traveling, exists, despite the fact that we do not see it anymore. We also have definite knowledge of the existence of heaven that overlooks 504, everything, and of the stars, and of all the other things that are remote from us. Man knows these things for certain. No one would deny to himself the existence of certain knowledge. In addition, competent recent Sufis say that during the removal of the veil, the Sufi novice often has a feeling of the oneness of existence. Sufis call that the station of combination, jam. 505. But then, he progresses to distinguishing between existent things. That is considered by the Sufis the station of differentiation, farq. That is the station of the competent Gnostic. The Sufis believe that the novice cannot avoid the ravine of combination, and this ravine causes difficulties for him because there is danger that he might be arrested at it and his enterprise thus come to naught. 506 The different kinds of mystics have thus been explained. The recent Sufis who speak of the removal of the veil and supersensory perception have delved deeply into these subjects. Many of them turned to the theory of incarnation and oneness, as we have indicated. They have filled many pages with their exposition of it. That was done, for instance, by Al-Harawi, 507 in the Kitab al-Maqamat, and by others. They were followed by Ibn al-Arabi and Ibn Sabin 508 and their pupils, and then by Ibn al-Afif, ad-Din, 509 Ibn al-Farid, and Agm ad-Din al-Israeli, 510 in the poems they composed. The early Sufis had contact with the Neo-Ismailiyya Shia extremists who also believed in incarnation and the divinity of the Imams, a theory not known to the early Ismailiyya. Each group came to be imbued with the dogmas of the other. Their theories and beliefs merged and were assimilated. In Sufi discussion, there appeared the theory of the pole, Qutbi, meaning the chief Gnostic. The Sufis assumed that no one can reach his station in Gnosis, until God takes him unto himself and then gives his station to another Gnostic who will be his heir. Avicenna referred to this in the sections on Sufism in the Kitab al-Asharat. He said, "The majestic truth is too exalted to be available equally to all who seek it." 511 or to be seen save by one person at a time. 512. The theory of successive poles is not confirmed by logical arguments or evidence from the religious law. It is a sort of rhetorical figure of speech. It is identical with the theory of the extremist Shia about the succession 513 of the Imams through inheritance. Clearly, mysticism has plagiarized this idea from the extremist Shia and come to believe in it. The Sufis, furthermore, speak about the order of existence of the saints who come after the pole, exactly as the Shia speak about their chiefs. 514 They go so far, in the identification of their own concepts with those of the Shia, that when they construed a chain of transmitters for the wearing of the Sufi cloak, Kirkua, as a basic requirement of the mystic way and practice, they made it go back to Ali 515. This points in the same direction and can only be explained as Shia influence. Among the men around Muhammad, Ali was not distinguished by any particular practice or way of dressing or by any special condition. Abu Bakr and Umar were the most ascetic and pious people after the Messenger of God. Yet, none of these men was distinguished by the possession of any particular religious practice exclusively peculiar to him. In fact, all the men around Muhammad were models of religion, austerity, asceticism, 516 and pious exertion. This is attested by their way of life and history. Indeed, with the help of these stories, the Shia try to suggest that all is distinguished from the other men around Muhammad by being in possession of particular virtues, in conformity with well-known Shia beliefs. It 517 is obvious that the Sufis in the Iraq derived their comparison between the manifest and the inner world from the Ismailiyya Shia and their well-known theory concerning the imamate and connected matters, at the time when the Ismailiyya Shia made its appearance. The Ismailiyya Shia considered the leadership of mankind and its guidance toward the religious law a duty of the Imam. Therefore, they assumed that there could be no more than one Imam if the possibility of a split were to be avoided, as is established in the religious law. Correspondingly, the Sufis then regarded as a duty of the pole, who is the chief Gnostic, the instruction of mankind in the gnosis of God. Therefore, they assumed that there could be only one on analogy from the Imam in the manifest world, and that he was the counterpart of the Imam. 518 They called him Pole, because the gnosis revolves around him, and they equated the saints with the allied chiefs. In their exaggerated desire to identify their concepts with those of the Shia. An instance of what I have just been saying is the lengthy discussion of the Fatimid in Sufi works. 519 The early Sufis made neither negative nor affirmative statements on the Fatimid. The lengthy discussion of recent Sufis was derived from the discussion of the subject and the dogmas concerning it, expressed by the extremist Shia in their works. God Guides to the Truth. 520. I 521 consider it appropriate to quote here a remark made by our Sheikh, the Gnostic and chief saint in Spain, Abu Mordi Isab. As Zayat 522 he repeated it very often. It concerns some verses from the Kitab al-Makumat of al-Harawi which suggest, and almost profess openly, the theory of absolute oneness. These are the verses. 523. The oneness of the unique one has never been declared, properly, by anyone. Since anyone who declares his oneness is one who denies his true oneness. Declaration of the divine oneness by a person who speaks about his attributes is dualism. 524 which the unique one has nullified. His own declaration of his own oneness is the true declaration of his oneness. And to describe him with attributes is deviation. 525. Abu Mordi says in defense of al-Harawi, people have found it difficult to explain how one could use the expression one who denies for those who declare the oneness of the unique one, and the expression deviation, heresy, for those who describe him with attributes. They have disapproved of the verses quoted. They have attacked the author and condemned him. But we say that, according to the view of that group of Sufis to whom al-Harawi belongs, declaration of the divine oneness means the negation of the very essence of createdness through affirmation of the very essence of primevalis. The whole existence is one reality and one being, Ayah. The great mystic, Abu Sa'id al-Kharas, 526 thus said, the truth is the very essence of that which is manifest, and the very essence of that which is inwardly hidden. The Sufis are of the opinion that the occurrence of any numerical plurality in that divine reality and 527 the existence of duality are imaginary and, compared with sensual data, are on the level of shadow pictures, or the pictures 528 in mirrors. Everything, except the very essence of primevalis, if one follows it up, turns out to be non-existent. This, they think, is the meaning of the statement, God was, and nothing was, with him. He is now in the same state in which he was. 529 This, too, is what is meant by the verse of Labid, which the Messenger of God considered to be true. Indeed, everything but God is vanity. 530. This is what the Sufis say. Consequently, a person who declares the divine oneness and describes God with attributes speaks about 1. A created being who declares the divine oneness, that is, he himself, 2. A created declaration of the divine oneness, that is, his action of declaring the divine oneness, and s. A primeval being who is declared to be one, that is, his worshipped master. Now, it has been mentioned before that declaration of divine oneness is negation of the very essence of createdness, but now, the very essence of createdness is, here, definitely stated, in connection with the declaration of divine oneness, and, in fact, in more than one way. Thus, the divine oneness is actually denied, and the claim to have declared the divine oneness, is false. It is the same as if someone were to say to someone else who is with him in a house, "There is nobody in the house except you." Whereupon the other person would reply at once, "This could be correct only if you were non-existent." And a competent scholar remarked in connection with the statement, "God created time," that these words contain a basic contradiction, because the creation of time precedes time, yet is an action that must take place in time. These things are caused by the difficulty of expressing the realities and the inability of language to convey the truth with regard to them and give them their due. If it is certain that he who declares the divine oneness is identical with him whose oneness is declared, 531, and that anything else is altogether non-existent, then the declaration of divine oneness is truly a sound one. This is what is meant by the Sufi statement, "Only God knows God." 532. There is no objection to a person's declaring the oneness of the truth, while retaining the outlines and traces of worldliness. This belongs to the chapter dealing with the fact that the good actions of pious people may be the bad actions of persons who are close to the divine. It results from the lack of freedom, servitude, and doubleness 533 of the human condition. For those who have ascended to the station of combination, it constitutes a defect. They are conscious of their rank and know that their imperfection is a deception resulting from human servitude, that vision can eliminate it, and that the very essence of combination can cleanse them from the uncleanliness of their createdness. The type of persons most firmly rooted in this assumption is that of those who hold the theory of absolute oneness and who say that gnosis, however interpreted, revolves around reaching the unique one. The poet uttered the remark, quoted, as an incitement and exhortation, referring to a higher station in which doubleness is eliminated and absolute oneness in its essence, not merely as a figure of speech or some kind of expression, is attained. Those who are safe and sound 534 can rest. Those who have trouble with the reality of oneness 535 ought to become familiar with God's statement, "I am his." 536 Hearing and vision. 537 If the concepts are known, there can be no quarrels about the words. All this teaches realizatio of the fact that there is something above this level, something about which one cannot speak and about which there is no information. This much of a hint is sufficient. Going deeply into matters like this lowers the veil. That is the gist of the Welkow Sufi statements. Here ends the quotation from Sheikh Abu Mordai b. Az-Zayat. I quoted it from the book on love by the Wazir Ibn al-Khattab, 538, entitled At-Ta'arif by El-Hub Ash-Sharif, Information on the Noble Love of God. I heard it from our Sheikh Abu Mordai himself several times. However, I think that the written form, in Ibn al-Khattab's work, preserves it better than my memory, because it has been a long time since I heard Abu Mordai tell it. God gives success. Many jurists and muftis have undertaken to refute these and similar statements by recent Sufis. They summarily disapproved of everything they came across in the Sufi path. The truth is that discussion with the Sufis requires making a distinction. The Sufis discuss 4 topics. 1. Firstly, they discuss pious exertions, the resulting mystical and ecstatic experiences, and self-scrutiny concerning one's actions. They discuss these things in order to obtain mystical experiences, which then become a station from which one progresses to the next higher one, as we have stated 539. 2. Secondly, they discuss the removal of the veil and the perceivable supernatural realities, such as the divine attributes, the divine throne, the divine seat, the angels, revelation, prophecy, the spirit, and the realities of everything in existence, be it supernatural or visible. Furthermore, they discuss the order of created things, how they issue from the Creator who brings them into being, as mentioned before. 543. The third topic is concerned with activities in the various worlds and among the various created things connected with different kinds of acts of divine grace. 4. The fourth topic, finally, is concerned with expressions that are suspect, if understood, in their plain meaning. Such expressions have been uttered by most Sufi leaders. In Sufi technical terminology, they are called ecstatic utterances, shatahat. 541. Their plain meaning is difficult to understand. They may be something that must be disapproved of, or something that can be approved, or something that requires interpretation. As for their discussion of pious exertions and stations, of the mystical and ecstatic experiences that result, and of self-scrutiny with regard to possible shortcomings in the things that cause these experiences, this is something that nobody ought to reject. These mystical experiences of the Sufis are sound ones. Their realizatio is the very essence of happiness. 542. As for their discussion of the acts of divine grace experienced by Sufis, the information they give about supernatural things, and their activity among the created things, these, also, are sound and cannot be disapproved of, even though some religious scholars tend to disapprove. That is not right. Professor Abu Ashaq al-Asfari, a leading Ash'arite, argued that these things should be disapproved of, since they might be confused with the prophetical miracles. However, competent Orthodox scholars have made a distinction between miracles and acts of divine grace, by referring to the advance, challenge, tahadi. 543, that is, the claim, made by a prophet in advance, that the miracle would occur in agreement with the prophetic revelation. It is not possible, they said, that a miracle could happen in agreement with the claim of a liar. Logic requires that a miracle indicate truthfulness. By definition, a miracle is something that can be verified. If it were performed by a liar, it could not be verified, and thus would have changed its character, which is absurd. In addition, the world of existence attests the occurrence of many such acts of divine grace. Disapproval of them would be a kind of negative approach. Many such acts of divine grace were experienced by the men around Muhammad and the great early Muslims. This is a well-known and famous fact. Most of the Sufi discussion of the removal of the veil, of the reception of the realities of the higher things, and of the order in which the created things issue, falls, in a way, under the category of ambiguous statements. 544. It is based upon the intuitive experience of Sufis. And those who lack such intuitive experience cannot have the mystical experience that the Sufis receive from it. No language can express the things that Sufis want to say in this connection, because languages have been invented only for the expression of commonly accepted concepts, most of which apply to the Cecibilia. 545. Therefore, we must not bother with the Sufi discussion of those matters. We ought merely to leave it alone, just as we leave alone the ambiguous statements of the Qur'an and the Sunnah. 546. Those to whom God grants some understanding of those mystical utterances in a way that agrees with the plain meaning of the religious law do, indeed, enjoy happiness. Finally, there are the suspect expressions which the Sufis call ecstatic utterances, shatahat, and which provoke the censure of orthodox Muslims. As to them, it should be known that the attitude that would be fair to the Sufis is to observe that they are people who are removed from sense perception. Inspiration grips them. Eventually, they say things about their inspiration that they do not intend to say. A person who is removed from sense perception cannot be spoken to. He who is forced to act is excused when he acts, no matter what he does. Sufis, who are known for their excellence and exemplary character, are considered to act in good faith in this and similar respects. It is difficult to express ecstatic experiences, because there are no conventional ways of expressing them. This was the experience of Abu Yazid al-Bistami 547 and others like him. However, Sufis, whose excellence is not known and famous, deserve censure for utterances of this kind, since the data that might cause us to interpret their statements so as to remove any suspicion attached to them are not clear to us. Furthermore, any Sufis who are not removed from sense perception and are not in the grip of a state when they make utterances of this kind also deserve censure. Therefore, the jurists and the great Sufis decided that Al-Hallaj 548 was to be killed, because he spoke ecstatically, while not removed from sense perception, but in control of his state. And God knows better. The early Sufis who are mentioned in Al-Kashiri's Risalah 549, those outstanding Muslims to whom we have referred above, had no desire to remove the veil and to have such supernatural perception. Their concern was to follow their models and to lead an exemplary life as far as possible. Whenever they had a supernatural experience, they turned away from it and paid no attention to it. Indeed, they tried to avoid it. 550 They were of the opinion that it was an obstacle and a tribulation and belonged to the ordinary perceptions of the soul, and, as such, was something created. They also thought that human perception could not comprise all the existential and that the knowledge of God was wider, his creation greater, and his religious law more certain for guidance than any mystical experience. 551 Therefore, they did not speak about any of their supernatural perceptions. In fact, they forbade the discussion of those things and prevented their companions, for whom the veil of sense perception was removed, from discussing the matter or from giving it the slightest consideration. They continued following their models and leading exemplary lives as they had done in the world of sensual perception before the removal of the veil, and they commanded their companions to do the same. 552 Such ought to be the state of the Sufi novice. God gives success. 17. The science of dream interpretation. This science belongs to the sciences of the religious law. It originated in Islam when the sciences became crafts. 553 and scholars wrote books on them. Dream visions and dream interpretation existed among the ancients, as among later generations. It existed among former, pre-Islamic, religious groups and nations. However, their dream interpretation did not reach us. 554 Because we have been satisfied with the discussions of Muslim dream interpreters. In any case, all human beings can have dream visions, and these visions must be interpreted. Truthful Joseph already interpreted visions, as is mentioned in the Qur'an 555, sound tradition in the Sahih, on the authority of the Prophet and on the authority of Abu Bakr, likewise establishes the existence of dream visions. Dream vision is a kind of supernatural perception. Muhammad said, a good dream vision is the 46th part of prophecy. 556. He also said, the only remaining bearer of glad tidings is a good dream vision, beheld by, or shown to a good man. 557. The revelation given to the Prophet began with a dream vision. Every dream vision he saw appeared to him like the break of dawn. When Muhammad went away from the morning prayer, he used to ask the men around him, did any one of you see a dream vision during the night? He asked this question in order to derive good news from dream visions, which might refer to the victory of Islam and the growth of its power. 558. The reason for perception of the supernatural in dream visions is as follows. 559. The spirit of the heart, which is the fine vapor coming from the cavity in the flesh of the heart, spreads into the veins and, through the blood, to all the rest of the body. It serves to perfect the actions and sensations of the animal powers. The spirit may be affected by lassitude, because it is very busy with the sensual perception of the five senses and with the employment of the external powers. When the surface of the body, then, is covered by the chill of night, the spirit withdraws from all the other regions of the body to its center, the heart. It rests, in order to be able to resume its activity, and all the external senses are, for the time being, unemployed. This is the meaning of sleep, as was mentioned before at the beginning of the book. Now, the spirit of the heart is the vehicle of man's rational spirit. Through its essence, the rational spirit perceives everything that is in the divine world, since its reality and its essence are identical with perception. It is prevented from assimilating any supernatural perception by the veil of its preoccupation with the body and the corporeal powers and senses. If it were without that veil or stripped of it, it would return to its reality, which is identical with perception. It would thus be able to assimilate any object of perception. If it were stripped of part of it, its preoccupation would be less. It is thus able to catch a glimpse of its own world, since external sense perception, its greatest preoccupation, now occupies it less. Its supernatural perception corresponds, in intensity, to the degree to which the veil is withdrawn from it. Thus it becomes prepared to receive the available perceptions from its own world that are appropriate for it. When it has perceived these perceptions from its own worlds, it returns with them to its body, since, as long as it remains in its corporeal body, it cannot be active except through corporeal means of perception. The faculties through which the body perceives knowledge are all connected with the brain. The active part among them is the imagination. It derives imaginary pictures from the pictures perceived by the senses and turns them over to the power of memory, which retains them until they are needed in connection with speculation and deduction. From the imaginary pictures, the soul also abstracts other spiritual intellectual pictures. In this way, abstraction ascends from the sensibilia to the intelligibilia. The imagination is the intermediary between them. Also, when the soul has received a certain number of perceptions from its own world, it passes them on to the imagination, which forms them into appropriate pictures and turns those perceptions over to the common sense. As a result, the sleeper sees them as if they were perceived by the senses. Thus, the perceptions come down from the rational spirit to the level of sensual perception, with the imagination again being the intermediary. This is what dream visions actually are. The preceding exposition shows the difference between true dream visions and false, confused dreams. All of them are pictures in the imagination while an individual is asleep. However, if these pictures come down from the rational spirit that perceives them, they are dream visions. But if they are derived from the pictures preserved in the power of memory, where the imagination deposits them when the individual is awake, they are confused dreams. 560. 561 should be known that true dream visions have signs indicating their truthfulness and attesting their soundness, so that the person who has the dream vision becomes conscious of the glad tidings from God given him in his sleep. The first of these signs is that the person who has the dream vision wakes up quickly, as soon as he has perceived it. It seems as if he is in a hurry to get back to being awake and having sensual perception. Were he to continue to sleep soundly, the perception given him would weigh heavily on him. Therefore, he tries to escape from the state in which he has supernatural perception, to the state of sensual perception in which the soul is always fully immersed in the body and the corporeal accidents. Another sign is that the dream vision stays and remains impressed with all its details in the memory of the person who perceived it. Neither neglect nor forgetfulness affects it. No thinking or remembering is required, in order to have it present to one's mind. The dream vision remains pictured in the mind of the dreamer when he awakes. Nothing of it is lost to him. This is because perception by the soul does not take place in time and requires no consecutive order, but takes place all at once and within a single time element. 562 confused dreams, on the other hand, take place in time, because they rest in the powers of the brain and are brought from the power of memory to the common sense by the imagination, as we have stated. The process is an action of the body, and all actions of the body take place in time. Thus, they require a consecutive order, in order to perceive anything, with something coming first and something else coming later. Forgetfulness, which always affects the powers of the brain, affects them. That is not the case with the perceptions of the rational soul. They do not take place in time and have no consecutive order. Perceptions that are impressed in the rational soul are impressed all at once in the briefest moment. Thus, after the sleeper is awake, his dream vision remains present in his memory for quite some time. In no way does it slip his mind as the result of neglect, if it originally made a strong impression. However, if it requires thinking and application to remember a dream vision after a sleeper is awake, and if he has forgotten many of its details before he can remember them again, the dream vision is not a true one but a confused dream. These signs belong in particular to prophetic revelation. God said to his prophet, "Do not set your tongue in motion to make haste with the revelation of the Qur'an. It is up to us to put it together and to recite it. And when we recite it, follow its recitation. Then, it is up to us to explain it." 563 dream visions are related to prophecy and revelation, as is stated in the sound tradition of the Sahih. Thus, Muhammad said, "A dream vision is the 46th part of prophecy." 564 In the same way, the characteristics of dream visions are related to the characteristics of prophecy. One should not consider that as unlikely. It appears to be this way. God creates whatever He wishes to create. As to the idea of dream interpretation, the following should be known. The rational spirit has its perceptions and passes them on to the imagination. The imagination then forms them into pictures, but it forms them only into such pictures as are somehow related to the perceived idea. For instance, if the idea of a mighty ruler is perceived, the imagination depicts it in the form of an ocean. Or, the idea of hostility is depicted by the imagination in the form of a serpent. a person wakes up and knows only that he saw an ocean or a serpent. Then, the dream interpreter, who is certain that the ocean is the picture conveyed by the senses and that the perceived idea is something beyond that picture, puts the power of comparison to work. He is guided by further data that establish the character of the perceived idea for him. Thus, he will say, for instance, that the ocean means a ruler, because an ocean is something big with which a ruler can appropriately be compared. Likewise, a serpent can appropriately be compared with an enemy, because it does great harm. Also, vessels can be compared with women, because they are receptacles, and so on. 565. Dream visions may be evident and require no interpretation, because they are clear and distinct, or because the ideas perceived in them may be very similar to the pictures by which they are represented. Therefore, it has been said in the sound tradition of the Sahih, there are three kinds of dream visions. There are dream visions from God, dream visions from the angels, and dream visions from Sita. 566 Dream visions from God are those that are evident and need no explanation. Dream visions from an angel are true dreams that require interpretation. And dream visions from Sita are confused dreams. It should be known that when the spirit passes its perceptions onto the imagination, the latter depicts them in the customary modes of sensual perception. Where such modes never existed in sensual perception, the imagination, 567, cannot form any pictures. A person who was born blind could not depict a ruler by an ocean, an enemy by a serpent, or women by vessels, because he had never perceived any such things. For him, the imagination would depict those things through similarly appropriate pictures, derived from the type of perceptions with which he is familiar, that is, things which can be heard or smelled. The dream interpreter must be on guard against such things. They often cause confusion in dream interpretation and spoil its rules. The science of dream interpretation implies a knowledge of general norms upon which the dream interpreter bases the interpretation and explanation of what he is told. For instance, they say that an ocean represents a ruler. Elsewhere, they say that an ocean represents wrath. Again, elsewhere, they say that it represents worry and calamity. Or, they say that a serpent represents an enemy, but elsewhere they say that it represents one who conceals a secret. Elsewhere again, they say that it represents life, and so on. 568. The dream interpreter knows these general norms by heart and interprets the dreams in each case as required by the data establishing which of these norms fits a particular dream vision best. The data may originate in the waking state. They may originate in the sleeping state. Or, they may be created in the soul of the dream interpreter himself by the special quality with which he is endowed. Everyone is successful at the things for which he was created. 569. This science never ceased being transmitted in the circles of the early Muslims. Muhammad b. Siri 570 was one of the most famous experts in dream interpretation. Among them, certain norms of dream interpretation were written down on his authority. People have transmitted them down to this time. Al-Kamay 571 wrote on the subject after Ibsiri. Recent scholars have written many works on it. The books in use among contemporary Maghribis are the Mumti and other works by Ibn Talib al-Qayrawi, 572, a scholar from al-Qayrawa, and the Kitab al-Ashara by as-Salami 573, which is one of the most useful and briefest 574 books on the subject. There also is the Kitab al-Marquba al-Uliya by Ibn Rashid, 575, who belonged to the circle of our sheikhs in Tunis. Dream interpretation is a science resplendent with the light of prophecy, because prophecy and dreams are related to each other, and dreams played a part in the prophetic revelation, as has been established in sound tradition. God knows the supernatural. 576. 18. The various kinds of intellectual sciences. The intellectual sciences are natural to man, inasmuch as he is a thinking being. They are not restricted to any particular religious group. They are studied by the people of all religious groups who are all equally qualified to learn them and to do research in them. They have existed, and been known, to the human species since civilization had its beginning in the world. They are called the sciences of philosophy and wisdom. They comprise 4 different sciences. 1. The first science is logic. It is a science protecting the mind from error in the process of evolving unknown facts one wants to know from the available, known facts. Its use enables the student to distinguish right from wrong wherever he so desires in his study of the essential and accidental perceptions and apperceptions. 577. Thus, he will be able to ascertain the truth concerning created things, negatively or positively. 578. Within the limits of his ability to think. 2. Then, philosophers may study the elemental substances perceivable by the senses, namely, the minerals, the plants, and the animals which are created from the elemental substances, the heavenly bodies, natural motions, and the soul from which the motions originate, and other things. This discipline is called physics. It is the second of the intellectual sciences. 3. Or they may study metaphysical, spiritual matters. This science is called metaphysics, al-ilm al-ilhi. It is the third of the intellectual sciences. 4. The fourth science is the study of quantities, measurements. It comprises 4 different sciences, which are called the mathematical sciences, ta'alim. The first mathematical science is geometry. It is the study of quantities. Measurements, in general. 579. The quantities, measurements, may be either discontinuous, inasmuch as they constitute numbers, or continuous, as geometrical figures. They may be of 1 dimension, the line, of 2 dimensions the plane, or of 3 dimensions the mathematical solid. These quantities, measurements, and the qualities they possess, either by themselves or in combination with each other, are what is studied in geometry. The second mathematical science is arithmetic. It is the knowledge of the essential and accidental properties of the discontinuous quantity, number. The third mathematical science is music. It is the knowledge of the proportions of sounds and modes and their numerical measurements. Its fruit is the knowledge of musical melodies. 580. The fourth mathematical science is astronomy. It fixes the various shapes of the spheres, determines the position and number of each planet and fixed star, and makes it possible to learn these things from the visible heavenly motions of each sphere, their motions, both retrograde and direct, their precession and recession. These are the basic philosophical sciences. They are 7, in number. Logic comes first. Then comes mathematics, beginning with arithmetic, followed in succession by geometry, astronomy, and music. Then comes physics and, finally, metaphysics. Each of these sciences has subdivisions. One subdivision of physics is medicine. Subdivisions of arithmetic are calculation, 581 The inheritance laws, and business, arithmetic. A subdivision of astronomy is the astronomical tables, Zij. They are norms for computing the motions of the stars and adjusting the data, in order to be able to know their positions, whenever desired. Another subdivision of the study of the stars is the science of stellar judgments, astrology. We shall discuss all these sciences, one after the other. It should be known that as far as our historical information goes, these sciences were most extensively cultivated by the two great pre-Islamic nations, the Persians and the Greeks, Rum. According to the information we have, the sciences were greatly in demand among them, because they possessed an abundant civilization and were the ruling nations immediately before Islam and its time. In their regions and cities, the sciences flourished greatly. The Chaldeans and, before them, the Syrians, as well as their contemporaries, the Copts, were much concerned with sorcery and astrology and the related subjects of powerful charms and talismans. The Persian and Greek nations learned these things from them. The Copts especially cultivated those things, which enjoyed great prominence among them. The Quran, al-Mataltu, mentions this fact in the story of Harut and Marut, 582, and the affair of the sorcerers. 583 There also are the reports of informed persons on the temples of Upper Egypt. 584 Later on, these things were declared forbidden and illegal by successive religious groups. As a result, the sciences concerned with them were wiped out and vanished, as if they had never been. Only a small remnant, transmitted by the practitioners of those crafts, has remained. And God knows better whether those crafts are sound. The sword of the religious law hangs over them and prevents choice of them, as a subject of study. 585. Among the Persians, the intellectual sciences played a large and important role, since the Persian dynasties were powerful and ruled without interruption. The intellectual sciences are said to have come to the Greeks from the Persians, at the time when Alexander killed Darius and gained control of the Achaemenid Empire. At that time, he appropriated the books and sciences of the Persians. However, 586 when the Muslims conquered Persia and came upon an indescribably large number of books and scientific papers, Sadi b. Abi Iwak wrote to Umar b. al-Khattab, asking him for permission to take them and distribute them as booty among the Muslims. On that occasion, Umar wrote him, "Throw them into the water. If what they contain is right guidance, God has given us better guidance. If it is error, God has protected us against it." 587 Thus, the Muslims threw them into the water or into the fire, and the sciences of the Persians were lost and did not reach us. The dynasty of the Rum originally belonged to the Greeks, among whom the intellectual sciences occupied a large place. They were cultivated by famous Greek personalities, among them the pillars of philosophy, and others. The peripatetic philosophers, in particular the Stoics, 588 possessed a good method of instruction in the intellectual sciences. It has been assumed that they used to study in which protected them from the sun and the cold. Their school tradition is assumed to have passed from the sage Luqman 589 and his pupils to Socrates of the Barrel, so and then, in succession, to Socrates' 590 pupil, Plato, to Plato's pupil, Aristotle, to Aristotle's pupils, Alexander of Aphrodisias and Themistius, and others. Aristotle was the teacher of Alexander, the ruler of the Greeks, who defeated the Persians and deprived them of their realm. He was the greatest Greek scientist and enjoyed the greatest prestige and fame. He has been called the first teacher. 591 He became world famous. When the Greek dynasty was destroyed and the Roman emperors seized power and adopted Christianity, the intellectual sciences were shunned by them, as religious groups and their laws require. But they continued to have a permanent life. 592 in scientific writings and treatments which were preserved in their libraries. The Roman emperors, 593 later on took possession of Syria. The ancient, scientific books continued to exist during their rule. Then, God brought Islam, and its adherents gained their incomparable victory. They deprived the Byzantines, Rome, as well as all other nations, of their realms. At the beginning, they were simple, in their ways, and disregarded the crafts. Eventually, however, the Muslim rule and dynasty flourished. The Muslims developed a sedentary culture, such as no other nation had ever possessed. They became versed in many different crafts and sciences. Then, they desired to study the philosophical disciplines. They had heard some mention of them by the bishops and priests among their Christian subjects, and man's ability to think has, in any case, aspirations in the direction of the intellectual sciences. Abu Ja'far al-Mansur, therefore, sent to the Byzantine emperor and asked him to send him translations of mathematical works. The emperor sent him Euclid's book and some works on physics. The Muslims read them and studied their contents. Their desire to obtain the rest of them grew. Later on, Al-Mamu came. He had some scientific knowledge. Therefore, he had a desire for science. His desire aroused him to action in behalf of the intellectual sciences. He sent ambassadors to the Byzantine emperors. These ambassadors were to discover the Greek sciences and to have them copied in Arabic writing. He sent translators for that purpose, into Byzantine territory. As a result, a good deal of the material was preserved and collected. Muslim scientists assiduously studied the Greek sciences. 594 They became skilled in the various branches. The progress they made in the study of those sciences could not have been better. They contradicted the first teacher, Aristotle, on many points. They considered him 595 the decisive authority as to whether an opinion should be rejected or accepted, because he possessed the greatest fame. They wrote systematic works on the subject. They surpassed their predecessors in the intellectual sciences. Abu Azar al-Farabi and Abu Ali Avicenna, in the East, and Judge Abul Walid b. Rushd, Avaris, and the Wazir Abu Bakr b. As-Sa'i, Arvempes, 596 in Spain, were among the greatest Muslim philosophers, and there were others who reached the limit in the intellectual sciences. The men mentioned enjoy especial fame and prestige. Many scientists restricted themselves to cultivating the mathematical disciplines and the related sciences of astrology, sorcery, and talismans. The most famous practitioners of these sciences were Jabir b. Higher in the East, 597, and the Spaniard, Maslamor b. Ahmed al-Majriti, and his pupils. The intellectual sciences and their representatives succeeded to some degree in penetrating Islam. They seduced many people who were eager to study those sciences and accept the opinions expressed in them. In this respect, the sin falls upon the person who commits it. If God had wanted it, they would not have done it. 598. Later on, civilizational activity stopped in the Maghreb and in Spain. The sciences decreased with the decrease of civilization. As a consequence, scientific activity disappeared there, save for a few remnants that may be found among scattered individuals and that are controlled by orthodox religious scholars. We hear that the intellectual sciences are still amply represented among the inhabitants of the East, 599 in particular in the non-Arab Iraq and, farther east, in Transoxania. The people there are said to be very successful in the intellectual and traditional sciences, because their civilization is abundant and their sedentary culture firmly established. In Egypt, I have become acquainted with numerous works by a great scholar of Herat in Khurasan, by name Sadi ad-Din at-Taftazai 600. Some of his works are on speculative theology, the principles of jurisprudence, and syntax and style, Baya. They show that he is well grounded in these sciences. They, also, contain things proving that he has studied and knows the philosophical sciences and is well versed in all the intellectual disciplines. God aids whomever he wishes to aid. 601. We further hear now that the philosophical sciences are greatly cultivated in the land of Rome and along the adjacent northern shore of the country of the European Christians. They are said to be studied there again and to be taught in numerous classes. Existing systematic expositions of them are said to be comprehensive, the people who know them numerous, and the students of them very many. God knows better what exists there. He creates whatever he wishes, and his is the choice. 602. 19. The science is concerned with numbers. The first of them is arithmetic. Arithmetic is the knowledge of the properties of numbers combined in arithmetic or geometric progressions. For instance, in an arithmetic progression, in which each number is always higher by 1 than the preceding number, the sum of the first and last numbers of the progression is equal to the sum of any two numbers, in the progression, that are equally far removed from the first and the last number, respectively, of the progression. 603. Or, the sum of the first and last numbers of a progression, is twice the middle number of the progression, if the total number of numbers, in the progression, is an odd number. It can be a progression of even and odd numbers, or of even numbers, or of odd numbers. 604. Or, if the numbers of a geometrical progression are such that the first is 1/2 of the second and the second 1/2 of the third, and so on, or if the first is 1/3 of the second and the second 1/3 of the third, and so on. The result of multiplying the first number by the last number of the progression is equal to the result of multiplying any two numbers of the progression that are equally far removed from the first and the last number, respectively, of the progression. 605. Or, the result of multiplying the first number by the last number of a geometrical progression, if the number of numbers, in the progression, is odd, is equal to the square of the middle number of the progression. For instance, the progression may consist of the powers of 2, 2, 4, 8, 16. 606. Or, there are the properties of numbers that originate in the formation of numerical mathalatha, triangle, murabba, square, muqaddimah, pentagon, and musaddasa, hexagon, progressions. 607. Where the numbers are arranged progressively in their rows by 608, adding them up from 1 to the last number. Thus, a mathalath, is formed. Other mathalathas are placed successively in rows under the sides. Then, each mathalatha is increased by the side in front of it. Thus, a murabba is formed. Then, each murabba is increased by the side in front of it. Thus, a muqaddimah is formed, and so on. The various progressions of sides form figures. Thus, a table is formed with vertical and horizontal rows. The horizontal rows are constituted by the progression of the numbers 1, 2, etc., followed by the Mathalatha, Murabba'a, Muqaddimah progressions, and so on. The vertical rows contain all the numbers and certain numerical combinations. The totals and the results of dividing some of the numbers by others, both vertically and horizontally, reveal remarkable numerical properties. They have been evolved by the inductive method. The problems connected with them have been laid down in the systematic treatments of arithmeticians. The same applies to special properties originating in connection with even numbers, odd numbers, the powers of 2, odd numbers multiplied by 2, 609, and odd numbers multiplied by multiples of 2, 610. They are dealt with in this discipline, and in no other discipline. This discipline is the first and most evident part of mathematics. It is used in the proofs of the mathematicians 611. Both early and later philosophers have written works on it. Most of them include it under mathematics in general and, therefore, do not write monographs on it. This was done by Avicenna in the Kitab ash-Shifa and the Kitab an-Najah, and by other early scholars. The subject is avoided by later scholars, since it is not commonly used, in practice, being useful in theoretical mathematical proofs rather than in practical calculation. They handled the subject the way it was done, for instance, by Ibn al-Ba, 612 in the Kitab Af al-Hijab. They extracted the essence of the subject, as far as it was useful, for the theory of practical calculation, and then avoided it. And God knows better. The Craft of Calculation 613. A subdivision of arithmetic is the craft of calculation. It is a scientific craft concerned with the counting operations of combining and separating. The combining may take place by add in the units. This is addition. Or it may take place by increasing a number as many times as there are units in another number. This is multiplication. The separating may take place by taking away one number from another and seeing what remains. This is subtraction. Or it may take place by separating a number into equal parts of a given number. This is division. These operations may concern either whole numbers or fractions. A fraction is the relationship of one number to another number. Such relationship is called fraction. Or they may concern roots. Roots are numbers that, when multiplied by themselves, lead to square numbers. 614 numbers that are clearly expressed are called rational, and so are their squares. They do not require special operations in calculation. Numbers that are not clearly expressed are called surds. Their squares may be rational, as, for instance, the root of 3 whose square is 3. Or, they may be surds, such as the root of 3, which is a surd. They require special operations in calculation. Such roots are also included in the operations of combining and separating. This craft is something newly created. It is needed for business calculations. Scholars have written many works on it. They are used in the cities for the instruction of children. The best method of instruction is to begin with calculation, because it is concerned with lucid knowledge and systematic proofs. As a rule, it produces an enlightened intellect that is trained along correct lines. It has been said that whoever applies himself to the study of calculation early in his life will as a rule be truthful, because calculation has a sound basis and requires self-discipline. Soundness and self-discipline, will, thus, become character qualities of such a person. He will get accustomed to truthfulness and adhere to it methodically. In the contemporary Maghrib, one of the best simple 615 works on the subject is the small work by Al-Asar 616 Ibn al-Bar al-Marakashi deals with the subject in an accurate and useful brief description, Torquis, of the rules of calculation 617. Ibn al-Bar later wrote a commentary on it in a book which he entitled Raf al-Hijab 618. The Raf al-Hijab 619 is too difficult for beginners, because it possesses a solid groundwork of theoretical proofs. It is an important book. We have heard our teachers praise it. It deserves that. In 620 the work, the author competed with the Kitab Fiqh al-Hizab by Ibn Mu'im, 621 and the Hamid by al-Adab. He gave a resume of the proofs dealt with in these two works, but he changed them inasmuch as, instead of ciphers, he used clear theoretical reasons in the proofs. They bring out the real meaning and essence of what in the work itself is expressed by calculations with ciphers. 622 All of them are difficult. The difficulty here lies in the attempt to bring proof. This is usually the case in the mathematical sciences. All the problems and operations are clear, but if one wants to comment on them, that is, if one wants to find the reasons for the operations, it causes greater difficulties to the understanding than does practical treatment of the problems. This should be taken into consideration. God guides with His light whomever He wants to guide. 623. Algebra. Another subdivision of arithmetic is algebra. This is a craft that makes it possible to discover the unknown from the known data, if there exists a relationship between them requiring it. Special technical terms have been invented in algebra for the various multiples, powers, of the unknown. The first of them is called number 624 because by means of it one determines the unknown one is looking for, discovering its value from the relationship of the unknown to it. The second is called thing 625 because every unknown as such refers to something. It also is called root, because the same element requires multiplication in second degree. Equations. The third is called property 626. It is the square of the unknown. Everything beyond that depends on the exponents of the two elements that are multiplied. 627. Then, there is the operation that is conditioned by the problem. One proceeds to create an equation between two or more different units of the three elements mentioned. The various elements are confronted, and broken portions, in the equation, are set 628 and thus become healthy. The degrees of equations are reduced to the fewest possible basic forms. Thus, they come to be three. Algebra revolves around these three basic forms. They are number, thing, and property. 629. When an equation consists of one element on each side, the value of the unknown is fixed. The value of property or root becomes known and fixed when equated with number. 630. A property equated with roots is fixed by the multiples of those roots. 631. When an equation consists of one element on one side and two on the other, 632. There is a geometrical solution for it by multiplication in part on the unknown side of the equation with the two elements. Such multiplication in part fixes the value of the equation. Equations with two elements on one side and two on the other are not possible. 633. The largest number of equations recognized by algebraists is 6. The simple and composite equations of numbers, roots, and properties come to 634. The first to write on this discipline was Abu Abdallah al-Khwarizmi 635. After him, there was Abu Kamil Shajabi. Islam 636 people followed in his steps. His book on the 6 problems of algebra is one of the best books written on the subject. Many Spanish scholars wrote good commentaries on it. One of the best Spanish commentaries is the book of Al-Qurashi 637. We have heard that Great Eastern mathematicians have extended the algebraic operations beyond the 6 types and brought them up to more than 20. For all of them, they discovered solutions based on solid geometrical proofs. 638. God gives in addition to the creatures whatever He wishes to give to them. 639. Business, arithmetic. Another subdivision of arithmetic is business, arithmetic. This is the application of arithmetic to business dealings in cities. These business dealings may concern the sale of merchandise, the measuring of land, the charity taxes, as well as other business dealings that have something to do with numbers. In this connection, one uses both arithmetical techniques, 640, and one has to deal with the unknown and the known, and with fractions, whole numbers, roots, and other things. In this connection, very many problems have been posed. Their purpose is to give the student exercise and experience through repeated practice, until he has the firm habit of the craft of arithmetic. Spanish mathematicians have written numerous works on the subject. The best known of these works are the Business Arithmetics of Az-Zurawi, 641, Ibn Az-Sam, 642, Abu Muslim b. Khaldu, 643, who were pupils of Maslam or al-Majriti, and others. Inheritance Laws 644. Another subdivision of arithmetic is inheritance laws. It is a craft concerned with calculation, that deals with determining the correct shares of an estate for the legal heirs. It may happen that there is a large number of heirs, and one of the heirs dies and his portions have to be distributed among his heirs. Or, the individual portions, when they are counted together and added up, may exceed the whole estate. 645. Or, there may be a problem when one heir acknowledges, but the others do not acknowledge, another heir, and vice versa. All this requires solution, in order to determine the correct amount of the shares in an estate and the correct share that goes to each relative, so that the heirs get the amounts of the estate to which they are entitled in view of the total amount of the shares of the estate. A good deal of calculation comes in here. It is concerned with whole numbers, fractions, roots, knowns and unknowns. It is arranged according to the chapters and problems of inheritance law. This craft, therefore, has something to do with jurisprudence, namely, with inheritance law, as far as it is concerned with the laws concerning the legal shares of inheritance, the reduction of the individual shares, all, the acknowledgement or non-acknowledgement, of heirs, wills, manumission by will, and other problems. And it has also a good deal 646 to do with arithmetic, inasmuch as it is concerned with determining the correct amount of the shares in accordance with the law evolved by the jurists. It is a very important discipline. The scholars who cultivate it have produced traditions attesting to its excellence, such as, for instance, the Fara'id, inheritance laws, constitute 1/3 of religious scholarship, and they are the first science to be abolished, 647 and other such traditions. However, as was mentioned before, I am of the opinion that according to their plain meaning, all those traditions refer to individual obligations, fara'id, and not to the inheritance laws, fara'id. The latter are too few in number to constitute 1/3 of religious scholarship, whereas individual obligations are numerous. Scholars, in early and late times, have written extensive works on the subject. Among the best works on the subject according to the school of Malik are the Book of Ibn Thabit, the Muqtasar of Judge Abul Qasim al-Hawfi, and the books of Ibn al-Muyama, al-Jadi, 648, az-Zordai, 649 and others. But al-Hawfi is preeminent. His book is preferable to all the others. A clear and comprehensive commentary on it was written by one of our teachers, Abu Abdallah Muhammad b. Salama as-Satai, 650, the leading sheikh of Fez. The Imam al-Haramay wrote works on the subject according to the school of Ash-Shafi'i. They attest to his great scholarly capability and his firm grounding in scholarship. The Hafites and the Habilites also wrote works on the subject. The positions of scholars in scholarship vary. 651. God guides whomever he wants to guide. 652. 20. The geometrical sciences. This science studies quantities, measurements, 653 quantities. Measurements may be continuous, like lines, planes, and geometrical, solids, or discontinuous, like numbers. It also studies the essential properties of the quantities, measurements, as, for instance, the angles of any triangle are equal to 2 right angles. Parallel lines do not intersect anywhere, even when they extend to infinity. The opposite angles formed when 2 lines intersect are equal to each other. The result of multiplying the first and the third of 4 quantities in a proportion is equal to that of multiplying the second and the fourth. 654 and so on. The Greek work on this craft, which has been translated into Arabic, is the Book of Euclid. It is entitled Kitab al-Usul wa al-Arka, Book of Basic Principles and Pillars. 655. It is the simplest 656 book on the subject for students. It was the first Greek work to be translated in Islam in the days of Abu Ja'far al-Mansur. The existing recensions differ, depending on the respective translators. There are the recensions of Hua b. Ishaku, 657, Thabit b. Qura, 658 and Yusuf b. Al-Hajjaj 659. The work contains 15 books, 4 on the planes, 1 on proportions, another 1 on the relationship of planes to each other, 3 on numbers, the 10th on rational and irrational quantities, 660 the roots, and 5 on solids. Many abridgments of Euclid's work have been written. Avicenna, for instance, devoted a special monograph treatment to it in the section on the mathematical disciplines in the Shifa. Ibn as-Sold 661 made another abridgment in the Kitab al-Iqtisar, and the same was done by others. Many scholars have also written commentaries on it. It is the starting point of the geometrical sciences in general. It should be known that geometry enlightens the intellect and sets one's mind right. All its proofs are very clear and orderly. It is hardly possible for errors to enter into geometrical reasoning, because it is well arranged and orderly. Thus, the mind that constantly applies itself to geometry is not likely to fall into error. In this convenient way, the person who knows geometry acquires intelligence. It has been assumed that the following statement was written upon Plato's door: "No one who is not a geometrician may enter our house." 662. Our teachers used to say that one's application to geometry does to the mind what soap does to a garment. It washes off stains and cleanses it of grease and dirt. The reason for this is that geometry is well arranged and orderly, as we have mentioned. Spherical figures, conic sections, and mechanics. A subdivision of this discipline is the geometrical study of spherical figures, spherical trigonometry, and conic sections. There are two Greek works on spherical figures, namely, the works of Theodosius and Melos on planes and sections of spherical figures. 663. In mathematical instruction, the book by Theodosius is studied before the book by Melos, since many of the latter's proofs depend on the former. Both works are needed by those who want to study astronomy, because the astronomical proofs depend on the material contained in them. All astronomical discussion is concerned with the heavenly spheres and the sections and circles found in connection with them as the result of the various motions, as we shall mention. Astronomy, therefore, depends on knowledge of the laws governing planes and sections of spherical figures. Conic sections also are a branch of geometry. This discipline is concerned with study of the figures and sections occurring in connection with cones. It proves the properties of cones by means of geometrical proofs based upon elementary geometry. Its usefulness is apparent in practical crafts that have to do with bodies, such as carpentry and architecture. It is also useful for making remarkable statues and rare large objects, effigies, hierarchical, 664, and for moving loads and transporting large objects, hierarchical, with the help of mechanical contrivances, engineering techniques, pulleys, and similar things. There exists a book on mechanics that mentions every astonishing, remarkable technique and nice mechanical contrivance. It is often difficult to understand, because the geometrical proofs occurring in it are difficult. People have copies of it. They ascribe it to the Borshaker 665. Surveying. Another subdivision of geometry is surveying. This discipline is needed to survey the land. This means that it serves to find the measurements of a given piece of land in terms of spans, cubits, or other units, or to establish the relationship of one piece of land to another when they are compared in this way. Such surveying is needed to determine the land tax on wheat, fields, lands, and orchards. It is also needed for dividing enclosures 666 and lands among partners or heirs, and similar things. Scholars have written many good works on the subject. Optics. Another subdivision of geometry is optics. This science explains the reasons for errors in visual perception, on the basis of knowledge as to how they occur. Visual perception takes place through a cone formed by rays, the top of which is the point of vision and the base of which is the object seen. Now, errors often occur. Nearby things appear large. Things that are far away appear small. Furthermore, small objects appear large under water or behind transparent bodies. Drops of rain as they fall appear to form a straight line, flame a circle, and so on. This discipline explains with geometrical proofs the reasons for these things and how they come about. Among many other similar things, optics also explains the difference in the view of the moon at different latitudes. 667 Knowledge of the visibility of the new moon and of the occurrence of eclipses is based on that. There are many other such things. Many Greeks wrote works on the subject. The most famous Muslim author on optics is Ibn al-Haytham. 668 others, too, have written works on the subject. It is a branch of the mathematical sciences.